He built an empire with his hands, but destroyed a family with a single message. 10 years ago, Julian Sterling walked away from the only woman who ever saw the man beneath the title. She was pregnant, with triplets. He never looked back. Now, face to face with the family he abandoned, he's brought to tears by a sight he thought he'd never deserve to see again. If someone you loved disappeared without a word, only to return with tears and a trembling apology, would you forgive them? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this story with someone who believes in second chances, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because love like this deserves to be heard. Now let's begin. Manhattan shimmered beneath the amber fingers of dawn, skyscrapers glinting like blades of glass above a city that never paused to grieve. At the top of one of those towers, Julian Sterling sat in silence. The luxury around him was obscene. Italian leather furniture, framed international awards, sleek tech humming in the corners, but none of it comforted the man behind the empire. His eyes, once sharp with ambition, were tired. He had everything, and no one to share it with. 10 years earlier, everything had been different. Back then, love wasn't an inconvenience. It was everything. Her name was Lila Hart. She had met him in New Orleans, under the tender hush of autumn light. Julian had just closed a regional acquisition deal, and Lila, barefoot in the garden behind her mother's Creole cottage, was humming as she read aloud to a group of children. Her voice carried like memory itself, soft, eternal, and vivid. That moment cracked something open in Julian, something long buried under polished shoes and inherited expectations. He was supposed to marry a senator's daughter and multiply the sterling fortune, but Lila wasn't polished for high society. She was honest, curious, and soulful. She asked about his favorite books, not his boardroom rankings. She laughed at his jokes instead of weighing their political correctness. And when she looked at him, she didn't see a CEO. She saw Julian. Their romance bloomed in secret. Dinners on her porch instead of gala tables. Walks through Spanish moss instead of red carpets. And eventually, a small wedding beneath. Lantern-lit oaks in a quiet chapel few would ever know existed. They were rebels, not the kind who protest with signs, but the kind who believe love is worth risking everything for. But love wasn't enough for Vivian Sterling. Vivian was the reason Julian had never known softness as a child. She raised him like a project, not a boy. She taught him early, image over honesty, control over chaos, silence over truth. When she learned of Lila, her disapproval was immediate and brutal. "She's not one of us," Vivian had sneered, sipping espresso in her marble kitchen. "She'll never survive our world." "You have responsibilities, Julian. You're not a child in love. You're a Sterling." At first, Julian resisted. He wanted both, the woman who made him human and the world that made him powerful. But as months passed, the pressure mounted. The board raised concerns. Old money allies withdrew support. Every hallway he walked became a corridor of expectation, echoing with unspoken ultimatums. Then Lila told him she was pregnant, with triplets. 3 children. 3 little lives growing inside the woman he adored. It should have been the happiest moment of his life. Instead, it became his greatest test. Vivian was clear. "If you do this," she said, "you will lose everything. Your stake, your name. I'll see to it." Julian hesitated. Then, one rainy evening, from behind the towering glass walls of his corporate office, he did the unthinkable. He texted her, "I must choose duty. No explanation, no goodbye. Just a decision made with trembling hands and a hollow chest." Lila received the message while folding tiny clothes she'd bought from a second-hand shop. Her world shattered in that moment, not with sound, but with silence. Not even a knock at the door, just the realization that the man she loved had vanished into obligation, leaving her and 3 unborn children in the shadows of his legacy. The next morning, she left New Orleans, her belly full of life, her heart full of heartbreak. Julian buried himself in his work. Every conference he spoke at, every ribbon-cutting ceremony, every profit report, none of it touched the ache beneath his skin. He told himself she'd be fine, that she didn't need him, that time would dull the edges. But time, as he would learn, doesn't dull, it deepens. It etches regret like water-carving stone. He tried to move on, but no other woman felt like Lila. No conversation was as effortless. No smile stirred that same flame. On his 10-year anniversary at Sterling Life Care, he stood on stage beneath thunderous applause. Cameras flashed, partners cheered, and all he could think about was a faded photo in his drawer, Lila in a white sundress, her hand resting on her stomach, her smile a whisper of forever. Bellefontaine wasn't the kind of place where time stood still, but it did know how to hold space for broken hearts. Lila Hart arrived in the small southern town in the early hours of a humid spring morning, her eyes puffy from silent tears, her hands resting protectively over the swell of her stomach. With no more than a duffel bag, a few baby supplies, and one treasured wedding photo, she stepped into the unknown with quiet courage. The town welcomed her the way it had always welcomed those searching for a second chance, gently, without questions. Locals didn't ask about her past. They noticed the way she rubbed her belly absent-mindedly, how she walked with purpose even when her steps were uncertain. They saw the strength in her, even when she hadn't yet seen it herself. Lila found a small, weather-worn cottage on the edge of a magnolia grove. It needed work, but it had charm, peeling shutters, a sagging porch, and wild jasmine climbing the walls. It became her haven. Within those creaking walls, she birthed her triplets, Ava, Eli, and Noah. Ava, firstborn, arrived with wide, searching eyes and the quiet intensity of someone born old. Eli came next, gentle, slow to cry, his tiny hand curling instinctively around his mother's finger. Then Noah, always impatient, even in the womb, emerged with a wail that echoed with raw life. In those moments, something remarkable happened. Lila wasn't alone anymore. She was a mother, and that made her powerful. The early years were grueling. Diaper changes by candlelight during power outages, nights spent pacing back and forth with crying babies on each shoulder, days juggling formula measurements, community tours, and side gigs at the local heritage center just to keep the lights on. But Lila endured, not with bitterness, but with quiet, determined grace. By the time the triplets were toddlers, Lila had earned the affection of the entire town. She told stories during weekend festivals, stories that brought old houses to life and made the past feel like a living friend. Her knowledge of Bellefontaine's ancestry helped secure a preservation grant for the historic district. Her passion rippled outward, and people noticed. Still, the ache remained. On the quietest nights, when the children were asleep and her tea had gone cold, Lila would hold that photo, the one from their secret wedding beneath the stars, and whisper the same silent question she had repeated for years. Why did you leave? She never spoke Julian's name to the children. Not because she hated him, but because they deserved to form their own stories, not inherit her heartbreak. When they asked, she'd simply say, "Your father is somewhere out there. Maybe one day you'll meet him." The children grew fast. Ava became the quiet leader of the trio. She was fiercely protective of her brothers, especially Noah, whose energy was boundless and unpredictable. Eli, with his soft-spoken wisdom, often played peacekeeper, his calming presence grounding them all. Their bond was undeniable, 3 pieces of a single heartbeat. Despite the absence of a father, their lives weren't joyless. They had water balloon fights in the backyard, built makeshift castles from cardboard, celebrated birthdays with handmade crowns and homemade cupcakes. Lila made sure of that. She filled every holiday with magic, every moment with intention. Her love was relentless, even in exhaustion. But something changed when they turned 8. Ava began asking deeper questions. She noticed how Lila would pause when a father walked into school pickup, how her voice caught when reading bedtime stories that ended with happily ever after. One evening, while watching a family film, Ava turned to her mother and asked, "Did Daddy love you?" The question gutted Lila more than she could admit. She swallowed the lump in her throat and answered with careful truth. "He did, once. But sometimes love isn't enough for some people, not because you're not worth it, but because they don't know how to keep it." She didn't cry that night. But later, when the children were asleep, she stepped outside onto the porch and allowed the tears to come freely. Meanwhile, far away in a Manhattan skyscraper, Julian Sterling sat in his penthouse library, flipping through old journals he had hidden from himself. His life looked perfect on paper: global expansion of Sterling Life Care, an honorary doctorate from Columbia, invitations to elite panels and forums, but none of. It made his hands stop trembling when he thought of Lila's last words. "Don't make me beg for the love you owe me." Her voice haunted him. He tried to drown it out with distractions, newer ventures, international press, high-stakes mergers. But her voice always returned, especially in the silence. On his 40th birthday, Julian found himself alone. He watched the candles flicker on an untouched cake and realized he had no one to share the moment with. He hadn't celebrated his children's birthdays, hadn't seen a first step or heard a first word. All he had were balance sheets and regrets. That night, he retrieved a shoebox from the back of his closet. Inside were photos he had secretly saved, one of Lila laughing beside a fountain in New Orleans, another, blurry, of the sonogram she had emailed him before he cut contact. He traced the outlines with trembling fingers and whispered, "I'm sorry." But apology meant nothing without action. And so, when Sterling Lifecare identified Bellefontaine as the ideal site for its next innovation hub, Julian didn't delegate the visit to a junior executive. He volunteered, not because of strategy, but because of longing. He needed to see the town where his family lived, even if only from a distance, even if he wasn't ready to be seen. To the world, Julian Sterling was the portrait of invincibility. In every business magazine, every televised interview, he was poised, articulate, brilliant. The face of modern maternal care, a man who'd turned tragedy into triumph, according to the press. But in truth, there was a room inside him that no one entered, a room where sorrow lived like a permanent guest. And inside that room, Lila's voice echoed endlessly. His days were regimented. Wake at 5, run 5 miles, scan the market, respond to executive summaries, sign contracts, deliver vision statements, and smile, always smile. But at night, when the windows reflected only his own face and silence reclaimed the penthouse, he lost that mask. He began drinking tea again, her favorite. Not because he liked the taste, but because it reminded him of sitting on her porch, watching twilight settle over New Orleans, her head on his shoulder. That memory had no price tag. It couldn't be bought or replicated. And that was what made it priceless. He often wondered if she still drank tea, or if she'd taught their children to love the same cinnamon-vanilla blend she used to brew in a chipped ceramic pot. The same one he had once called ugly, but magical. He still had that pot. It sat high on a shelf, untouched but never discarded, like the life he had walked away from. Marcus, his younger brother, had visited one evening with a bottle of scotch and a worried look. He never judged Julian, but he didn't coddle him either. "You've built an empire," Marcus said, "but you left your heart behind." Julian didn't answer. He just looked away. "You can still go back," Marcus added quietly. "Maybe not to who you were, but to who you were supposed to become." That night, Julian didn't sleep. He wandered through his home, stopping before a hidden drawer in his private study. It hadn't been opened in years. Inside were handwritten notes, faded postcards, and a small pair of pink knitted baby shoes, one of the first things Lila had ever bought after. Discovering she was pregnant, he held them gently, as if they might vanish if he gripped too hard. Across the city, Sterling Lifecare's headquarters buzzed with preparations for expansion. The Bellefontaine project was already underway, contracts signed, blueprints approved. Julian's mother, Vivian, remained the ever-present storm behind his public calm. She masked her control in polished strategy, but her manipulations ran deep. She had made it clear over the years, Lila and the children were an unwise detour. She never mentioned them directly, but in boardroom speak, they became liabilities, distractions, unaudited risks. "Don't let emotion blur the mission," she told him once, brushing imaginary lint off her blazer. But Julian was no longer blind. He began to notice things. The carefully scrubbed history in internal reports, the way HR compliance officers sidestepped questions about executive family affairs, the thinly veiled attempts to erase every trace of a past he hadn't given permission to forget. He said nothing. He simply watched. And quietly, he planned. His trips to Bellefontaine were supposed to be brief, a symbolic gesture, a CEO touchpoint. But when his driver turned off the freeway and the countryside opened before him like an old book, he felt a tug in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The streets were slower. People waved. Time moved differently, and it scared him. He was no longer Julian the strategist in this town. He was just a man trying to remember how to breathe without achievement. His first day there, he avoided the town center entirely. He walked the edges, observed from park benches and side streets. It was easier that way, easier than admitting what he was really looking for. On the third day, he passed a mural near the community library. It showed children playing beneath trees, their laughter captured in brushstrokes. At the corner of the mural, a woman's figure stood out, painted with grace, holding a book. It was Lila. He stepped closer. Her likeness was unmistakable. A plaque beneath read, "To the voice that preserves our past and protects our future. Thank you, Miss Hart." Julian's throat tightened. He wasn't just a memory in her world. He was invisible. She had created beauty without him, raised children without him, become a legend in a town he hadn't set foot in since he chose legacy over love. And yet, he couldn't turn away. That evening, he returned to his hotel and made a decision. No more anonymous watching. No more pretending he was only there for business. He needed to see her, not to reclaim anything, not to beg for what he lost, but to understand who he had left behind. On a soft spring morning, Bellefontaine stirred beneath a veil of pink petals. Cherry blossoms danced along the breeze, brushing against weathered storefronts and sunlit sidewalks like memories returning after a long absence. Julian stood outside Mason's Corner Cafe, hand resting on the doorknob, heart caught somewhere between dread and longing. He had passed this cafe 3 times already, walked past slowly, his eyes scanning through the windows, always telling himself, not today. But this time, something shifted. He couldn't leave without knowing if she still smiled the same way, or if she would even look at him at all. The door chimed softly as he entered. Inside, the smell of fresh biscuits, vanilla coffee, and warm cinnamon settled into his senses like a song from another life. The cafe was quiet, save for the low hum of morning chatter. He scanned the room, and there she was, Lila Hart, sitting near a sun-drenched window, notebook open, tea steaming beside her hand. 10 years had passed, but her presence still stilled the air. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her hair gathered in a loose knot. A strand had slipped, brushing her cheek. She looked peaceful, but not untouched. There was weight in her eyes now, a maturity shaped by storms survived and victories won alone. 3 children sat with her. Ava, poised and silent, her eyes scanning a book. Eli, tracing patterns on a napkin, thoughtful even in play. And Noah, grinning, energy coiled in his frame like a spring, mid-joke about something only he found funny. Their features echoed her, grace, poise, softness, but in each child, Julian saw reflections of himself. He froze. Lila looked up. Their eyes locked. She didn't gasp, didn't rise. Her expression didn't crumble into recognition or bloom into sentiment. It held, steady, guarded. Her lips parted slightly. She whispered his name, not with longing, not with venom, just acknowledgement. Julian. He stepped forward, every part of him aching. Lila, I didn't expect. She raised a brow, voice calm but firm. You didn't expect to see your children? The cafe, oblivious to the reunion it hosted, carried on. Conversations continued. Coffee steamed. But at their table, time folded in on itself. Julian's gaze shifted to the triplets. He began, but no words followed. His voice broke beneath the weight of the moment. Noah looked up. Mom, who's this? Lila's hand touched her son's shoulder gently. This is someone we used to know. Someone important. Ava studied him, cautious but curious. He looks like Eli. Eli blinked, then tilted his head. Why are you crying? Only then did Julian realize the tears running down his cheeks. He knelt beside them, careful not to crowd, voice trembling. I'm your father, and I know I don't deserve this moment, but I had to see you. Silence followed. The children didn't move, but they didn't turn away either. Lila exhaled. We should talk. Not here. Outside, the air had shifted. The sky threatened rain, as if nature itself sensed the storm that had just passed through. They walked through Bellefontaine's old park. Lila led them to a bench beneath an oak tree, the same one she had read under during the children's toddler years. The tree had witnessed scraped knees, whispered lullabies, and now, this. I don't want apologies, she began. I want honesty. What are you doing here, Julian? He didn't flinch. I came for the project. That was the reason. But the truth, I've thought of you every day since I left. Every award, every handshake, every deal. None of it replaced what I lost. And you expect what? Her tone wasn't cruel, just tired. Redemption? A second act? No, he said quietly. Just a beginning. She looked at him. Really looked. Past the suit jacket, past the carefully composed face of the man she once loved. She searched for something real. And perhaps she found it, because her voice softened. They ask about you. They don't say it outright, but I see it in their eyes when other kids talk about dads. I tell them you're far away. I don't lie. But I don't tell the whole truth either. Julian nodded slowly. I don't expect forgiveness. But if there's anything I can do now, anything, I want to earn my place in their lives. And maybe if it's not too late, yours too. The children played nearby, watching from a distance as if sensing the gravity in their mother's posture. Lila stood. Then start with them, because if they trust you, maybe one day I'll learn to trust you again too. Julian looked up at her, eyes full of quiet awe. You're even stronger than I remembered. She offered a small, reserved smile. I had to be. The days following their reunion passed in slow motion. Julian remained in Bellefontaine, not as a guest of honor or a corporate figurehead, but as a man trying to reclaim something fragile. Each morning, he walked through the town quietly, never calling attention to himself, never arriving with an entourage. He visited the library where Lila had curated history, browsed the community garden she helped build, and lingered near the schoolyard where the children played, always watching from a respectful distance. Then, one afternoon, Lila called. Would you like to pick them up from school today? Julian stood speechless, the words echoing louder than any boardroom applause. I'd be honored. It wasn't much, just a short walk from the school gates to the house, but for Julian, it felt like miles. When he saw them emerge, Ava holding Eli's hand, Noah darting ahead with endless energy, his breath caught. Noah noticed first. You came, Julian smiled. I did. They walked together, the triplets surrounding him cautiously, like animals unsure of whether to flee or follow. He didn't press. He answered their questions carefully. Ava asked about his job. Eli asked if he liked dogs. Noah, of course, asked if he could drive a sports car someday. Julian laughed. Not today, but someday, we'll see. That evening, they played a board game in the living room while Lila watched from the kitchen. She didn't interrupt. She didn't guide. She observed. Quietly, intently. When the children went to bed, she joined Julian on the porch. I need to know something, she said, voice steady. Why didn't you fight for us? Not just me, for them. Julian's reply came slow, careful. Because I didn't know how to fight without losing everything, and I was too much of a coward to realize that losing everything for the right reasons would have been worth it. She didn't respond at first, just nodded. I made my peace with raising them alone, she finally said. But they deserve to know who they are, every part of it, and that includes you. I won't rob them of that. Julian lowered his gaze. And what about us? Lila folded her arms. One step at a time. They come first. That became their rhythm. Julian returned the next day. And the next. He helped Noah with homework. Brought Ava books on astronomy. Sat with Eli on quiet walks where they barely spoke, but somehow said everything. He took them to the town fair, bought them lemon ice, and lost embarrassingly at the ring toss. When a stranger asked if they were his kids, he said yes, and meant it. The bond grew slowly, but it grew. One day, Ava fell while biking, scraped her knee badly. Julian rushed to her side, panicked. She looked up through tears and said, You came, and something broke in him, the wall, the guilt, the silence. He held her, not as a man making amends, but as a father who'd missed 10 years and was now terrified of missing a moment more. Word spread in Bellefontaine. Some were skeptical, others cautiously hopeful, but most simply observed. They saw a man who no longer drove a luxury car, who shopped at the local grocery, who attended PTA meetings without drawing attention. Lila remained cautious. She didn't allow the children to spend the night at Julian's rental house. She didn't invite him to the Sunday dinners with friends. But she no longer closed the door when he lingered. After saying goodbye, and sometimes, when the children were upstairs, they sat on the couch together in silence, sharing tea and the quiet comfort of two people who'd lost everything, and might be finding something new. Julian had started journaling again. Each entry wasn't about profits or plans. It was about Ava's quiet strength, Eli's gentle heart, Noah's curiosity, and Lila, her laughter, her sharp wit, the way she still tucked her hair behind her ear when thinking. Then came the call from Marcus. She knows, Marcus said. Julian froze. Who? Vivian. She found out you've been in Bellefontaine. She's furious. He expected that. But what he didn't expect was the next part. She's contacting the board, planning to frame this as a reputational risk. Julian's past was coming back. For real this time. Not just in memories, but in headlines. He drove to Lila's house that night. I need to tell you something, he said, eyes heavy. There's going to be press. They're going to dig. They may even try to question you. My mother won't stay silent. Lila didn't blink. So let them. You're not worried. I've spent 10 years building a life from ashes. There's nothing they can take that I haven't already lost and rebuilt. Julian stared at her with something close to awe. How did I ever walk away from you? She looked down. Because you didn't believe in me, or in yourself. Maybe now, you do. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. I'm asking for time, to earn whatever space you're willing to give me. Lila met his gaze. Then take it. But remember, if you ever walk away again, there's no third act. You show up or you disappear forever. Julian nodded. I'm not going anywhere. And this time, he meant it. Redemption, Julian soon discovered, was not a grand act. It was 1,000 small choices made every single day. There were no instant apologies, no sweeping declarations that made the past vanish. What lay before him now was the long, uneven path of showing up, fully, honestly, and without expectation. The first few weeks were marked by uncertainty. He'd arrive early at the community center to help Lila with weekend exhibitions. He offered to restock shelves, sweep floors, and take direction without question. Some locals welcomed him back with cautious warmth. Others barely acknowledged him. But Julian didn't flinch. He wasn't there for applause. He was there because this was the only life that had ever meant anything. At home, Lila set boundaries. He could visit the kids on school nights but not stay past dinner. No surprises, no late-night visits, and certainly no gifts meant to buy affection. Julian honored every line she drew. One evening, after helping Eli rehearse for a school play, Julian lingered on the porch. Rain was beginning to fall in soft drops. Lila joined him, a cup of tea in her hands. You never used to be this quiet, she said. I never used to listen, Julian replied. She glanced at him. You're different. I had to be. The man he was built to succeed in rooms that didn't allow love. I let those rooms define me. And now, I'm trying to build something new, not just in the company, in myself. For a moment, they listened to the rain. The next week, Julian flew to New York for the Sterling Life Care Board meeting. His public image was at a crossroads. Whispers of his personal entanglements had made their way into the press. Investors were uneasy. A publicist advised him to issue a carefully worded statement and distance himself from Bellefontaine. Instead, Julian walked into the boardroom and did the unthinkable. He told the truth. I abandoned my family for this company, he said, voice steady. And now I'm working to earn their trust again. That doesn't make me weak. It makes me honest. And if that's a liability, so be it. Gasps followed. Some board members looked stunned. Others, impressed. Vivian Sterling, regal, unmoved, spoke last. This is not how a Sterling conducts business. Julian met her gaze without blinking. Then maybe we've been conducting business the wrong way. The fallout was immediate. Headlines spread. Stock prices wavered. But something else happened too. Support poured in from unexpected places. Young professionals, working parents, advocacy groups. People saw a man willing to lose everything for the right reasons. And they responded. Back in Bellefontaine, Lila watched the clip on her phone. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She simply whispered, He's doing it. Julian returned home late that Friday. He looked tired, but lighter. The triplets greeted him with a group hug that nearly knocked him off his feet. Later that evening, as they roasted marshmallows in the backyard, Ava said, Dad, some kids at school said you used to be rich. Julian chuckled. Used to be? Well, like, super rich. I had a lot of money, he admitted. But I didn't have what mattered. What matters? Eli asked. Julian looked at them, then at Lila, who sat just beyond the fire's glow. People you'd do anything to protect, he said. That's real wealth. Lila met his eyes across the flames. No words passed between them. But something did. Understanding. He had changed. Not just for them, but because of them. The Sterling Life Care annual charity gala had always been a fortress of tradition. Held in Manhattan's historic Linden Pavilion, the event welcomed old money, new influence, and a tidal wave of media. It was designed to dazzle. Champagne towers, velvet gowns, gold leaf place cards, all choreographed to uphold an image of polished perfection. But this year, something had shifted. Julian stood backstage, not in his usual tailored tuxedo, but in a simple black suit with no tie. His eyes scanned the crowd from the curtain's edge. There they were, executives, socialites, politicians, all waiting for a polished speech, a strategic announcement. something to restore the headlines to safe, profitable narratives. But that wasn't what he had come to give. Lila hadn't attended. He hadn't asked her to. She had smiled gently and said, "If you're doing this for us, you don't need us to watch. If you're doing it for them, make sure you're honest." And he intended to be. When his name was announced, polite applause filled the room. He stepped onto the stage slowly, gripping the sides of the podium not for dramatic effect, but because he was nervous in a way he hadn't felt since his first investor pitch. Except this time, he wasn't selling a product. He was offering his truth. "Good evening," he began, voice firm but vulnerable. "I won't take much of your time, but I will ask for your attention, not as the CEO of Sterling Life Care, but as a man who made a terrible choice and is trying to make things right." The room fell silent. "I left someone behind 10 years ago, someone who loved me when I had nothing, someone who built a life for the children I was too afraid to meet. I thought success meant never looking back. I was wrong." A pause. "Tonight, I want to show you who truly built this company, not with spreadsheets and signatures, but with love, sacrifice, and perseverance." He motioned to the projection screen. It lit up with images, none from boardrooms or product launches. Instead, it showed a small community center in Bellefontaine, a mural of children under oak trees, Lila hosting a local history walk, Ava holding a science fair ribbon, Eli painting beside a classroom window, Noah performing cartwheels in the background, mid-laugh. The crowd stared, hushed. "These are my children," Julian said, "and that's the woman I once failed. But I'm not here to bury that truth. I'm here to honor it." A few gasps, a few murmurs. Even Vivian Sterling, seated front row in her signature pearls, didn't blink, but her jaw tightened. "I built this company for mothers," Julian continued, "but I ran from the mother of my own children. I advocated for families while abandoning my own. Tonight, I reclaim both." The room didn't erupt in applause. Not yet. It waited. "I understand the risk. I understand what this means for investors. But if leadership means anything, it's the courage to stand in the storm and say, 'This is who I am. I will no longer separate my integrity from my title.'" He stepped back. Silence lingered. Then, unexpectedly, a standing ovation rose. Not universal, but real, genuine. Some stood with tears. Some hesitated. But the ripple had begun. Later that evening, away from the cameras, Julian stood alone on the garden balcony of the venue. The city lights blinked below, cold and brilliant. But his thoughts were far from Manhattan. He pulled out his phone. A message waited. "Lila, the kids are proud. So am I." Julian closed his eyes, breathing in the moment, not as Julian Sterling, CEO, but as the man who had finally faced himself. Meanwhile, in Bellefontaine, Lila sat on the couch, the triplets asleep upstairs, her phone resting on her chest. Her heart beat slower now, more steadily. The man she once loved had disappeared. But the man returning. He was someone new, someone becoming. Legacy, Julian had learned, wasn't etched in stone buildings or sealed in trust funds. It lived in the quiet decisions made when no one was watching. In the months following the gala, the ripple effect of Julian's public confession reached places no press release ever could. For the first time, Sterling Life Care's identity was not crafted by a branding agency. It was shaped by its founder's willingness to own his failure. And from that truth, something remarkable began. Julian returned to Bellefontaine, not as a visitor this time, but as a man intent on planting new roots. He purchased a modest home near the community garden, just a few blocks from Lila's. He didn't ask to move in. He didn't suggest family dinners. He simply made himself available, present, grounded, and real. The triplets responded in ways only children can. Slowly, sincerely. Ava began calling him Dad during everyday moments, when asking for help with homework or correcting him on a constellation's name. Eli started sitting beside him without being prompted, sometimes just to read. Noah, bold and boundless, told his friends at school, "My dad's back. And he's actually kind of cool." But the deepest healing came quietly. Julian joined Lila at a local school fundraiser. They stood behind a bake sale table, shoulder to shoulder, selling cookies and laughing about burnt batches. It was mundane, uneventful, but in that moment, it felt like a miracle. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Lila turned to him on the porch. This is what I wanted. Not a grand mansion, not a perfect story, just someone who shows up." "I'll keep showing up," he said. "As long as you'll let me." "I will," she replied. "But not just for me, for them." He nodded. "Always for them." Julian's work life transformed as well. He restructured Sterling Life Care from the inside out. He appointed new leadership in marginalized regions, launched initiatives focused on maternal support in underserved communities, and funded grassroots programs that aligned with Lila's values. It wasn't to just corporate reform, it was personal penance translated into public service. The board resisted at first, but the public response overwhelmed them. People didn't just see a business, they saw accountability in action. Julian didn't gloat. He simply continued. Vivian remained distant. She attended board meetings. She offered critiques. But one evening she arrived unannounced at Julian's Bellefontaine home. Lila opened the door. They stared at each other for a long moment, not as enemies, not even as rivals, but as two women connected by one complicated man and three innocent children. I'd like to meet them, Vivian said, voice quiet. Lila studied her face. They're playing outside. Vivian walked to the backyard, watching Ava teach Noah how to build a paper airplane while Eli doodled quietly under the tree. She didn't speak. She simply sat on the bench beside them and watched. That night, she left without ceremony. But Julian received a note the next day, I see now. You chose correctly. Time continued its quiet march. Holidays were spent together, imperfect, beautiful, chaotic. Julian learned how to braid Ava's hair. He became Eli's chess opponent. He built elaborate Lego cities with Noah that ended in inevitable collapses and roaring laughter. And Lila? She flourished. With Julian's support, she launched the Bellefontaine Heritage Collective, an independent foundation preserving the town's stories and voices. She hosted educational programs, published community memoirs, and led cultural preservation workshops that garnered national attention. Julian didn't stand beside her as a benefactor. He stood as a supporter, a partner. He carried boxes, served refreshments, took notes. This wasn't about visibility. It was about building a life side by side. One crisp autumn evening, the Triplets performed at the local harvest recital. Ava sang. Eli played piano. Noah danced with unfiltered joy. Julian and Lila sat in the front row, fingers loosely intertwined, not as a performance, but as something that had quietly become real. Afterward, as the family walked home beneath a canopy of amber leaves, Julian paused outside his gate. I never thought this would be possible, he said. Lila looked at him. Neither did I, but I'll never stop being grateful. She smiled. Then don't. Just keep choosing this, every day. He nodded, kissed her hand, and walked toward his door. Behind him, he could hear the Triplets debating over dessert, the sound of home echoing like music he'd once forgotten how to hear. Love, true love, rarely blooms without trials, and sometimes the deepest test comes not from betrayal or regret, but from fear of loss. It was a frigid winter evening when the call came. Julian had just returned from a community meeting, his coat still dusted with snowflakes, when Lila's voice cracked through the phone. It's Eli. He collapsed. At school, the world fell silent. No headlines. No board meetings, no mission statements, just the sound of Julian's keys dropping to the floor as he ran out into the night. At the hospital, the hallways pulsed with urgency. Nurses moved swiftly, monitors beeped, and in the sterile light of a pediatric ICU, Eli lay motionless, his small body tethered to machines that hummed and blinked with purpose and fear. The diagnosis, an undetected heart condition, congenital, silent all these years, until now. Julian stood frozen at the foot of the bed, hands clenched, chest heaving. How did I miss this? He whispered. How did I not know? Lila, holding their son's hand, didn't look up. We didn't know, we couldn't have, but Julian's guilt was deafening. He had missed first steps, first words. And now, he feared he might miss the chance to say goodbye. In the hours that followed, he didn't leave Eli's side. He read aloud from his old journals. He played soft music on his phone. He whispered apologies, broken, raw, and unfiltered. I wasn't there, he murmured. But I'm here now. I'll always be here now. I swear it. Lila watched from the doorway, her heart cracking in places she thought had long healed. She saw a man shattered, but not fleeing. This wasn't the Julian who had once disappeared under pressure. This was a father who would now carry pain on his shoulders if it meant shielding his child from even a sliver of it. Specialists were flown in. Julian activated every connection, every favor, every ounce of influence he had. He didn't care about cost. He didn't care about perception. His only concern was the boy lying in that bed with wires stitched across his chest like unanswered questions. During a long midnight stretch, Lila finally broke. She sank into the chair beside Julian and whispered, "I can't do this alone." He reached for her hand. "You're not alone. Not anymore." The surgery was delicate, high risk, but necessary. Hours passed. When the surgeon finally emerged, mask lowered, expression measured, Julian braced himself for the verdict. "He's stable." He pulled through. The relief that followed didn't come in shouts. It came in tears, in soft gasps, in Lila collapsing into Julian's arms as her body trembled with silent gratitude. Inside the recovery room, Eli stirred slowly. His eyes fluttered open, landing first on his mother, then on Julian. "You stayed," the boy whispered. Julian smiled through tears. Always. That moment became something sacred, not a second chance, but a beginning built on sacrifice, not sentiment. In the days that followed, Julian and Lila took turns sleeping in the hospital room. They read to Eli, played card games, painted pictures on the window panes with washable markers. They talked about dreams and fears and everything in between. For the first time, they weren't partners recovering from the past. They were guardians of a future neither of them was willing to lose again. The story of Eli's battle spread throughout the company and the town. But Julian made sure no press release was issued, no board-approved narrative. This wasn't about publicity. It was about presence. Still, word got out. And something unexpected happened. Parents from around the country reached out, sharing stories of misdiagnoses, of systems that had failed them, of children who hadn't made it. Julian listened. And then he acted. Sterling Life Care announced the launch of a national pediatric care initiative, mobile screening units, emergency intervention teams, research funding focused not on profit, but on prevention. He named it the Heart Project, in tribute not to himself, but to the boy who survived and the woman who never stopped fighting. Months later, Eli returned home, weakened but stronger in spirit. And one evening, as they all sat on the porch watching fireflies flicker through the dusk, Julian leaned close to Lila and said, "I once thought love was measured in words, in promises, but it's not. It's measured in the hours you spend choosing someone, over and over again." Lila, resting her head on his shoulder, whispered back, "And in the moments you stay when it's hardest." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to, because some chapters aren't written in dialogue. They're lived. The town of Bellefontaine had always marked its seasons not with calendars, but with feeling. When winter faded and the scent of magnolia returned to the air, the townspeople prepared for the annual spring festival, a celebration of survival, of stories, of new beginnings. This year, the festival felt different. Not because of the weather or the decorations or the food stalls lining the square, but because of the family walking through it together. Julian, Lila, Ava, Eli, and Noah. Together. They moved through the crowd not as a spectacle but as a unit, familiar, bonded, and whole. Ava led the way, her notebook in hand, cataloging facts for her school's cultural preservation project. Eli walked beside her, still recovering, but full of quiet resolve. Noah bounced ahead, chasing bubbles with wild laughter, and Julian and Lila strolled side by side, fingers occasionally brushing, no longer afraid of being seen. The townspeople watched. Some nodded. Some smiled. But all felt something in the air. Renewal, not just of spring, but of hope. Under the newly restored gazebo at the center of town, Julian was asked to speak. Not as a CEO, not as a guest, but as a resident. He stepped forward, adjusting the mic, and looked out over the crowd, not as a man above them, but among them. "Thank you," he began, voice soft but clear. "Thank you for giving my family the space to grow, and me the time to understand what truly matters." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Lila. "I've spent years trying to define success. I thought it was built with numbers and applause, but I was wrong. Success is built with quiet mornings. It's built with forgiveness, with showing up for the people who still believe in you, even when they have every reason not to." Applause followed, not the kind given out of courtesy, but the kind that said, "We see you, we understand." That evening, the festival glowed under lanterns and laughter. Children danced, elders told stories by firelight, and the Sterling family, rebuilt not by chance but by choice, sat together, watching it all unfold. Julian's company had evolved too. The Heart Project grew into a nationwide movement. It introduced programs that trained local health advocates, mobile clinics that served rural families, and scholarships for children of single parents. Sterling Life Care was no longer just a name. It was a legacy reimagined. Vivian, now quieter, occasionally visited Bellefontaine. She no longer gave orders. She brought books for the children. She stayed for dinner. And when she sat beside Lila during Ava's award ceremony at school, the gesture required no explanation. Even Marcus found his way back. He moved into a neighboring town, offered consulting support, and joined Julian in rethinking corporate responsibility. Together they started a nonprofit wing aimed at empowering young entrepreneurs from overlooked communities. But none of it rivaled what Julian found at home. He learned how to cook Lila's favorite gumbo, badly at first. He learned to sew a button back on Eli's shirt. He even learned to meditate with Ava in the mornings, while Noah climbed him like a jungle gym. And one warm evening, as they watched the sunset from the back porch, Julian turned to Lila. "I don't want to wait another 10 years to ask this," he said. She raised an eyebrow, curious. He pulled out a simple ring, nothing flashy, just a silver band engraved with the initials of their children. "Will you let me start again, with you?" Lila's smile held 1,000 memories. "Only if we start from today, not from the past." He nodded. "Today's all I've ever needed." They kissed, soft, assured, real. The triplets caught them and groaned in unison. "Ew." Julian laughed. "Get used to it." "Your mom just said yes." Noah screamed. "Does this mean we get another cake?" And just like that, their new chapter began. The years that followed were not without challenges, school changes, business adjustments, parenting missteps. But they were navigated together. Every step, every misstep, every lesson was shared. The Sterling home was never grand, but it was full of stories, of healing, of loud dinner conversations and quiet bedtime hugs. The photo frames on the walls weren't arranged for show. They were snapshots of life reclaimed. Julian still traveled sometimes. Lila still lectured, but no one missed a birthday. No one missed a recital. And every evening, no matter how late, Julian returned home, to laughter, to questions, to small arms wrapping around his neck. To love, not the romanticized idea of love, but the kind earned through trials and carried through time. The kind that changes a man, a family, and even a town. Because love, when chosen again and again, doesn't just mend what's broken. It builds something new. As the last light fades on this unforgettable journey, we're left with a question that lingers in the heart. Can time truly heal what once seemed lost? Julian and Lila's story wasn't perfect. It was messy, painful, raw. But in the end, it was also real. Because love isn't just a feeling, it's a decision. A choice we make when it's hardest. A promise we honor, even after everything has fallen apart. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been faced with the choice to forgive someone who broke your heart? Would you take them back if they truly changed? Or would you walk away to protect your peace? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. If this story moved you, if you felt something in Lila's resilience or Julian's redemption, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances, and subscribe for more powerful stories that speak to the soul. Because here on Love in Twilights, we don't just tell stories. We remind each other that love, when chosen bravely, still wins. Until next time, stay open, stay strong, and always stay tender.